Hello, hello. This is Casey Ruff, and welcome to episode 19 of season 2. Today, we are speaking with Mark Reid. Mark is the host of one of my favorite podcasts, the Zen Sammich Podcast. Mark was hosted on our primary podcast, so be sure to check out Mark's amazing story on episode 35 of Boundless Body Radio. I was also fortunate enough to be featured as a guest on his show last year on episode 9, and he is now the first ever repeat guest on this show as we interviewed him on episode 3 of season 2. Mark Reid, welcome back to the How to Make a podcast.
Thanks, Casey. It's awesome to be here. And not only were you on Zen Sammich, you were the very first Zen Sammich interview. Now, I've done, dozens now, but you were the first.
That's amazing. You never forget your first, dude.
Exactly.
Well, this is a good time. I never use this. I'm going to use the clapping sound effect feature on my podcasting board. I don't think you can hear it on your end, but you're getting a nice round of applause. Maybe they're cheering a little bit for me too, but anyway, that was
I love it. No, that's cool. Actually, that kind of ties into like stuff. I actually made notes for this, Casey. Like, I've been a guest on several podcasts before, and I usually don't make notes because you just show up if you're a guest. You just answer questions. But I love this topic so much. I made some notes, and one of them was like it's like down my list, but it was to always be tweaking. In sales they say ABC, always be closing. In podcasting, it's ABT. Always be tweaking your.
Always be tweaking.
Not the drug version, but like always be tweaking your podcast. Like, and so whether it's adding sound effects or background music, just always be improving, just adding something, evolving, anyway.
Well,
I love it.
You're already dropping inspirational bombs. Next time you come back on the show, I want you to do your best Alec Baldwin impression from Glengarry Glen Ross and always be tweaking.
Always be tweaking.
Coffee is for tweakers.
Awesome. I love it.
That's great. Well, this is exactly why I wanted to invite you back. I mean, I know a lot of podcasters, as do you, and it's such a cool community. A lot of people are just so willing to share their information, things they've learned, tips and tricks. I think if anybody called us at any time and said like, hey, I'm thinking about starting a podcast, what do you think? Any one of us would be more than willing to share, what we've learned along the way, because it is a process. But I thought of you specifically because, Zen Sammich has been going for quite a while now. You're always changing and improving and adapting. And I just absolutely love it. And I can tell that, the first question we ever asked you on this podcast was, what is your why? So maybe it would be a good time to, introduce yourself, introduce your podcast, and tell us why you podcast.
Yeah, it's funny. I get that question a lot, and I almost answer it differently every time. But Zen Sammich started originally as a website. I'll make it a long story short, but the true origin was I was asked to write a blog for a blog. I was asked to write an entry. I wrote 2 articles, and they were published, and I enjoyed them so much. But I wasn't actually satisfied with the person who asked me with the website of the person who asked me to do the articles. And I thought I could do a better job than this. So I started my own website, not knowing how to do so, by the way. That relates to podcasting. And I started this journey not knowing squat about video editing, sound editing, anything. But anyway, I wrote those articles and it inspired me to start the website. And I initially started a podcast to supplement the website. So I could go on to the podcast and say, hey, go check out zensammich.com, which you should still do. But a little shameless plug there. But what happened is the podcast took over. It actually became much more popular and, generated more of an audience than the website ever did. So now it's the reverse. The website supplements the podcast. And as to the why, it's just, I've got, one, I enjoy podcasts. I listen to them. When I'm driving in the car or when I'm washing dishes or whatever. And, I do want to put a positive message out there. I like interesting stories. I interview people that have interesting stories like yourself. And I also, the Zen part of it, it's more Sammich than Zen. It's a little bit more fun than all Zen. It's not religious or anything, but I do promote a positive message to stay calm in life. And even when life's tough, and be present in the moment and, keep calm and carry on.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. You really accomplish all of those things. I would say you do have really interesting guests. I love when people bring on interesting guests that talk about things that I may or may not care about. And that certainly has been the case. And you get me interested in those things, like whatever your guests are talking about, like I maybe didn't know anything about them or what they were doing, but it's like, wow, this is just interesting storytelling, and you're really good at getting those stories. I would be very curious to hear your notes, but before we do that, I do want to talk about how are you finding your people? You use a platform that I almost never use, and you used it to a lot of success. And I wanted to kind of start there, like how are you finding your people on a platform that I don't use?
Well, you are referring to LinkedIn, and it is amazing because I never in a million years would have thought that would be my platform. And that goes to the message of anyone that's listening to this that might be starting a podcast or even just thinking of starting a podcast. You got to find your audience. They're out there. I don't care what your podcast is about. It could be about like some niche of, Star Wars or something. I mean, something very, very specific. It could be about minor characters in Star Wars or something. And there's 50,000 people out there who want to hear that podcast. I assure you, but you got to find them. They're not going to just find you in the ether. So I had to, there was a lot of trial and error, and I started just on Facebook. And anyway, I started on 4 platforms: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. I'm still there on all of them, but now 80% of my marketing concentration is on LinkedIn because the algorithm's a little bit more favorable to what I do. And that is sort of my demographic that I'm going for. Maybe a little bit, I hesitate to say more educated, but just, people who are a little bit more, there's more college educated folks on LinkedIn than elsewhere. But I mean, not that my podcast is my podcast ain't that smart of a podcast. You cannot be that smart and still like Zen Sammich, I assure you. But I don't know if I got to the intent of the question, but how do I find?
Yeah, okay. That absolutely got to the intent. And so I don't use LinkedIn as a social media thing. I will share an episode on LinkedIn because my host, Buzzsprout, has a button. And once you link it, it automatically links. So it takes me 15 seconds to say, hey, new podcast episode dropped today with such and such. If they're on there, I try to tag them. If not, I don't. And I push send, and it goes into what I would have considered like, this is resume land or whatever. And I've never used it as a like social media platform. So maybe you could talk about not only finding guests, but are you actually building your audience on LinkedIn?
Hugely so. In fact,
wow.
Yeah, it's actually my podcast has doubled in numbers in just the last few months based on my presence on LinkedIn. And I have officially more followers on Twitter than I do on LinkedIn, but LinkedIn is quickly catching up. It will pass it. It'll pass my numbers on Twitter. I have like 8,500 on Twitter, and I've got around close to 6,000, I think, on LinkedIn, but it's going so fast now. It'll shoot past Twitter soon. And, but the Twitter folks don't click out. They don't come listen to the show. I can do a promo on Twitter, and I get, I have a loyal following there too, but I might get 10 people who like it. I'll put a promo on LinkedIn, and I get 100 people. And that's just the people who are engaging. That doesn't even show the numbers of people who maybe they don't hit the little thumbs up or comment, but they still hit my link and they still go listen to the show because I see the download numbers.
Wow.
But yeah. And as far as finding people, what I wanted to go to is the point you made about you thought it was a good resume website. It was for years. I thought of LinkedIn as like, this is where you go find a job, or this is where you go network for a business connection. It has become a true social media platform. There are people who post family stuff. There's people who post, stuff that you would see on a Facebook or Twitter. You see it on LinkedIn all the time. It's got a lot less trolls and critics, and they're there too, but at far fewer numbers. And people just seem to be friendlier. And I don't know, I'm biased now because my posts have taken off. I've had a couple that have gone over 200, 300,000, views. So yeah, several, like not just one or two, like I've probably had, I don't know, maybe about 10 that have gone.
Wow.
I've had probably 10 that have gone over 100,000 views.
Wow.
So,
No, you're blowing my mind. And I hardly even know what question to ask since I spent so little time on there.
right.
But it's like, I think of Facebook is where I go because I'm an old person and that's where us old people hang out. And that's where, I post most of the stuff, related to the podcast. I can also post, a picture, an article, or a blog or something that I've written. Instagram is more for the, the pretty stuff. The visual sound bites go there. Pictures go there. Twitter is basically shorter, the things that make everybody angry, and we all get angry at each other on Twitter and throw hate around behind our avatars. I think that's the only thing it's for. TikTok, I'm obviously like 30 years too old to even try. But what is it? What would you post on, LinkedIn if somebody like me who only thinks it's just for business and businessmen and people looking for jobs?
Well, okay. So this does touch on some of the notes I had. This was like the second half of my notes.
Good, I was wondering.
Yeah, it was on marketing, and because marketing is critical. You could have the best podcast in the world, but no one will find you if you don't promote it and get it out there. But here's the thing, and this is to answer your question. You can't just go on and just promo bomb the social media universe. Or like, here's another audiogram, here's another promo to my show, because people will mute and block and tune you out. How you have to market your podcast is, well, here's how I do it and how it's worked for me. I'm not saying you have to do it, but this way, but it's worked for me, is you got to establish a connection. I think about it like, if you're going to go buy a used car and you got that used car salesman coming towards you and he's just giving you a big spiel, you're tuning him out already. You already feel like he's full of BS. He's, this guy is taking me for a ride. Well, if you just show up to promote your podcast all the time, people are going to view you like a used car salesman. So don't do that. It seems counterintuitive, but go on and make friends with people. Go on and so I post my marketing kind of formula on LinkedIn is the majority of my posts don't have anything to do with my podcast specifically. I do tie it in at the bottom, but like I'll post a video and usually I go for something funny or something inspiring. I'll give you an example of one that went over 100,000 views recently. It was a short video of a turtle was turned over on its back and, it was upside down. It was in the water, a shallow pool of water. And so it's on its back on its shell and it's kind of like flailing around, and there's like 10 or more turtles around, and they know that this turtle's in distress. So they all suddenly swim over and they flip this turtle back over upright. And so, okay, that has nothing to do with the Zen Sammich podcast specifically, but it's a very specific, or it's a very inspiring video. And, I forgot my caption, but it was something like, help others in need or whatever. Or I think it was like the instinct to help is amazing to watch. And then I tied it into a Zen tip of the day. And at the end, I'm like, hey, follow this guy, me, for more videos and inspiration, and listen to the Zen Sammich podcast. So I just tag it there at the end. And so the idea is, and I'll hush up after this, but the idea is you're going to build friendships, not just sell to people. And when people like you and they like what you're doing and they think you're funny and they think you have a good message, an inspirational message, then they will want to listen to your podcast, because then they're going to oh, I like this guy. I will go check out that Zen Sammich podcast.
Wow. Okay. Here was my thinking, and I still do this, and it's probably just out of habit because I thought this is how it would work. I'm that guy. You're talking right to me. Like I throw up information about my podcast way too much. If I have any friends that actually see anything I do, I would be stunned at this point. And I keep it mostly to our business page on Facebook. I will do some promoting on Instagram, and I will send something out in the Twitter sphere for everybody to hate on or whatever. But my thinking was, okay, I'm going to tag the person I'm interviewing. I'm going to promote them. I'm going to put their hashtags on this, not mine. And then that person's going to say, wow, this is so cool. It's already got all my stuff. People are going to find me through this thing. So I'm going to go out there and share this with everybody. Super proud of it. Hopefully I did a good enough job. I didn't screw up the interview and, highlighted that person and really made something that they were really proud of. And, by and large, that does not happen. It's kind of the way maybe you feel the same way. Like when I'm hosted on somebody else's show, I think it's a huge honor, but I feel a little weird about putting myself out there, and I still do it, but I don't know. It's harder for me and less natural. And I think to my guests, I wonder if they're feeling the same way, but I don't think my marketing strategy is the very best one anyway.
Well, I do know a little bit about your numbers from a long time ago. I don't know them recently, but I know that you have pretty good numbers for podcasts. So you can kind of do it your way, the way you've been doing it. I think for a couple of reasons. My observation would be for a couple of reasons. One, you have a good niche, the Boundless Body podcast. It's very specific. And it goes to like a human need, like health and fitness, and specifically the keto diet, that genre. You've got a niche that people are looking for, and you do it well. So in that way, you can kind of just promo bomb the social media universe, because people are looking for it. People aren't looking for a Zen Sammich. I have to make them want to go look for a Zen Sammich.
Ordered one at a deli and they didn't give me one. They gave me a Reuben. But
See, you gotta go to Spotify, Apple, or Google instead. Type in wow. Zen Sammich. But as for your guest, you can't. It's always helpful if a guest will promo on their end, for their folks, but you cannot depend on it. I've had big name guests, and the episodes have been bombs because they didn't give a darn about about promoting. They're on a bunch of podcasts or whatever. They've got their own podcast, so they didn't care about promoting their one little guest spot on mine. So you can't depend on it. And then I've had smaller guests and who are thrilled to be on the podcast, and then they will enthusiastically go promote it, and then those numbers go up. They do better than the big name folks.
I agree. Those are the really hidden gems. If you can capture somebody's story that hasn't really been publicly told very much, and those people are super excited, and you create an awesome episode where they feel really special. I love those. I could not do enough of those. I love those. Wow. Well, that's really helpful. Is there anything else we need to know about LinkedIn? I'm going to start doing these things. I think that's very interesting.
It just is. It's like any social media platform. It's always slow and steady at first. So you can easily get frustrated. I probably went 2 months of posting stuff, and I'm like, nobody's seeing this, man. And I would know that it was good content, but it just wasn't getting out there. I just didn't have many connections yet. I didn't have many followers. Those are two different things. On LinkedIn, connections kind of like a friend on Facebook or whatever. But then followers kind of like the way it is on Twitter. There are people who just follow you and you don't follow them. They just like what you're putting out. And so LinkedIn has a little bit of both. And at first it is kind of slow, just like anywhere. But so if someone was just getting started on LinkedIn, I would say at first you do want to beef up your connections, and you do that, or the way I did that was, we'll start with the handful that you have. So you could start with me, Casey, because we're a connection on LinkedIn, and then through that you can go look at who my connections are, and then you can look at their posts and you can comment on their posts. I mean, it's work, dude. It's fun, but it's also work. I mean, like I had to go in to, like, when I started with say 10 connections, and like I said, I'm in the thousands now. I go to those 10 connections and I see their posts and I see who's commenting on their posts. Well, then I go look at those people's posts and comment on those posts. And through that, I can do an invite for a connection with those people. And I grew my little circle from 10 to say 100. And then once you start revving it up, once you get about to 1,000, then it starts growing exponentially. And now I don't even invite connections anymore at all. I just people just follow me. And hey, there are some major players on LinkedIn that have 300,000 followers. I'm nowhere close to that, but my numbers go up so fast these days. I'm looking at it and like, wow, another 100 people follow me overnight, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that is really great information. I think this is funny. Can I tell you what scares me to death? When I was like on LinkedIn a little bit more is when I was working with the old company that I was working for. So right. I would say probably like 70 or 80% of all the connections I have were from that company. And, right. and since I've left and started my own business, and the thing that terrifies me is people seeing that I'm more active on LinkedIn, and all of the people that used to work for the old company going, oh, here he is. He's building up his profile. His stupid business failed. He's going to come crawling back. And I just don't want those people to get any satisfaction whatsoever.
Hey, I hear you. One reason I like being on LinkedIn is it was the anonymous. I had the opposite situation. I didn't know anyone. So all the other platforms I showed up on, I have friends, like literal friends I know in real life. And so I'm kind of always conscious of that when particularly on Facebook, if I post something, I'm like, how do I feel about so-and-so seeing this? I mean, it's hypocritical. I teach Zen, which my ego should not be concerned with what you're thinking about me. However, I'm also a human being. And so I do care. Like, what is Casey going to think about I don't ever worry about you, but like old friends, I'm like, what is so-and-so going to think when they see this?
Yeah.
But on LinkedIn, it was like I showed up on another planet. I didn't know anybody. So I actually felt kind of liberated to be myself.
Wow.
And yeah. And I think that's another reason why it took off.
Super interesting. Well, and we talk about your motives all the time, and I love to say that I don't care about downloads, but it's like we all care about downloads. We don't do this for nobody to listen to it, especially if you've got a good message and you feel great about your message. You want people to hear it, and it's something that once you create, it lives on and on and on. And it's always cool to see how many people downloaded an episode that we did, with you. You were episode 30. People still download that episode, and it's kind of cool to see that still exists. So I really appreciate that. I'm telling you right now, screw my notes. We're going to your notes. This has been so fascinating already. What other things have you put down? Let's talk about that.
Well, I mean, we have already talked about the second one. The first one I was it wasn't like I had notes like, hey, I'm going to come on and take over Casey's podcast here. And
please do. You're doing such a good job.
No, this was just more like, I love this topic and it interests me because it's, this is like my full-time job, my unpaid full-time job. This is my volunteer full-time job. And although I do get paid a little, I got a Patreon. I mean, we can talk sometime about Patreon too. I get a little bit of support, but no, so I started making notes this past week. And number one, and you kind of have to start here. The marketing is essential for sure. You can't make it without the marketing. So that you can't have one without the other, the two things I'm going to mention here, but you can't just market a crummy podcast either. Number one is content is king. You've got to have a good show. You've got to have a good message. And I sort of made notes on like where I think new podcasters, myself included, screw up. So if there's a newbie here listening to this, let me shortcut you. Let me fast track you past some mistakes you might make in the beginning, so that you don't make them. Right. If you're going to do a solo episode, script it. You're not Bill Burr. I mean, you might be as talented as say Bill Burr or Mark Maron, these like comedians that have very successful solo podcasts, but don't just turn on the mic and hit record and go, James Joyce stream of consciousness here. Don't just like babble on. Have at least an outline of what you want to talk about. Your content will be so much better if you do that. And you're also not Joe Rogan. And again, you might be, I'm sure you probably are cooler than Joe Rogan, whoever's listening to this, but nobody wants it. But if your name is not known, if your name is Kevin Jones, and not Joe Rogan, nobody wants to listen to 3 hours of you talking to your buddy Sam or whatever.
Yeah.
So keep your interviews I would say within an hour. I try to do my interviews 30 minutes. That's just me. I mean, but I would say keep it short and concise. And
I would just like to point out there, all of those people that you named, it wasn't like they just started a podcast.
Right.
And it was like really good. Like, who remembers episode 247 of Joe Rogan? Like, nobody does. But he didn't skip any steps. He had a career.
He had an audience. He had an audience first, right?
What was it, like news radio he did in like the late 90s? Like, he's been around for a long time. He was on TV. People recognize him. Bill Burr has been killing it as a stand-up comic for a very long time. After bombing shows, I'm sure, that nobody saw in stupid clubs that he probably didn't want to do. All of these people have, it's not like they were all of a sudden famous. Nobody skips the process.
That's exactly right. They already had a built-in audience. And if you're starting a podcast and you listen to those guys and you think, hey, I want to have the Monday morning podcast like Bill Burr, well, you can't, not right out of the gate. You maybe build that up, but you can't do it the way he did because you don't have the audience yet. My suggestion would be keep listening to those guys, and you can get some interesting insight into how they do their podcast. They have a whole production crew, and they, you can get some insight. But my suggestion would be go listen to NPR podcasts, or excuse me, my favorite is a podcast called Revisionist History with Malcolm Gladwell.
I love that show.
Awesome. And I've ripped that off so many times, and not any content, but what I will listen to that show. And not only am I listening for the interesting content, and Malcolm Gladwell's got this amazing insight, but I'll sit there with a pen and paper, make notes like, oh, okay, so they weaved in some background music here. Okay, he inserts his narration here. I'll even go back through that. This is how nerdy I am about this, Casey. I'll go back through and I'm like, how long did they let that guy talk? And I'm like, okay, they let him talk for 45 seconds before they put in some background music. And so if you listen to some of my more recent episodes, I'm doing a little bit of that. Like, I just had an episode. I don't want to out the guy. I don't think he'll listen to this particular podcast, but he was an interesting guy, but he just went on and on, kind of like I'm doing here, but he went on and on. So I had to break up his story. And so what I did is, like, when I'm editing, I let him go for about 2 minutes, and then I found a good stopping point, and then I inserted audio later where I say, and then I went on to ask so-and-so about his career in the blah, blah, blah. And then he comes back in. So it sort of breaks up a long stretch of monologue there. You pulled
that off. That was really good.
Thank you. Well, I got that from Revisionist History. And then I weave in background music. It just changes the vibe. It keeps you awake, keeps you interested. And there are places you can get that stuff for free. You can get royalty-free music on pixabay.com. There's a ton of places. Just type, just Google royalty-free music, and there's tons out there. So I would say that would be my advice. Go listen to NPR podcasts. They're top notch. All of them are. Go listen to Revisionist History. Get ideas from, content is king. Make your podcast better than the average Joe who just hits record and,
I think if you listen to Revisionist History, you will realize that for every 30 minutes of this episode, there's probably 100 times more time put into the research. Maybe just for Malcolm too. He's got a whole team, obviously. Right. And that's probably that same amount afterwards in the editing. And that's what makes, our average listener a lot different than Malcolm Gladwell. Like, they are, you can tell, highly, highly researching these people and creating stories out of something that most people would have never heard of, that makes it so interesting. It's way different than Shauna, and the example we give all the time, Shauna and her neighbor drinking rosé at 3 in the afternoon talking about their crazy cats. You know what I mean? Totally different.
Yeah. And that is, to be honest, if you're going to get into podcasting, you better love it, because it is work. It's a lot of, but I don't view it as work because I do love it. But I put that kind of research. If I'm going to interview guests for 30 minutes, I've probably spent a few hours doing like background research or putting together my outline, or, trying to ask them questions that they haven't been asked. If they've been on other podcasts, I'll go listen to those podcasts. and then you get some answers to questions you were going to ask. Well, then you can take that answer and, you can start at the follow-up point. Like they've answered a question on a previous podcast and you're like, oh, so then you start when you have them on your show, you're like, well, I know that you said on Casey's podcast that you blah, blah, blah. Well, let me ask you this then, da, da, da. And you take it a step further. Not only does the listener find that interesting because you've given them the answer to the first question, but you've put them in a new direction. The person being interviewed likes it because they're answering a new question instead of regurgitating the old one.
Yeah, I love that. One thing I've been doing a little bit more of recently is when I'm researching a guest, I will find several podcasts that they've been on and I'll listen to those, but I'll also take the topic and see what another show and another guest think about the same topic. So for example, we interviewed a guy who has a bone broth company and I've listened to the 3 or 4 podcast episodes I could find on him who was being interviewed. So like, okay, he's been asked this question 4 out of 4. So I'm not going to ask the same question. I'm going to reformulate it, but let's see what this person who has a bone broth company says. And then let's see what that person who has a bone broth company says. And so I'll take questions from those and ask him the same things and see if they jive.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's the way to do it. Because you want, content is king. You've got to have a good show or people aren't going to keep listening. One of the notes I'd made is like, look at it from a consumer's point of view. Think about your own habits. If you were going to surf through some random podcast on Apple, let's say you just went onto Apple's recommended list, and you start clicking and listening, you're going to give each podcast about maybe 10 seconds to capture your attention or you're gone. If they didn't grab you in those first 10 seconds, you're like, no, that one's not for me. Click, I'll go to the next one. So you got to think about that. If you're putting content together for a podcast, you got to grab that person, from the get-go, and you got to keep them engaged and entertained.
Yeah. One thing that was fun that I'm glad I did in the very beginning, I'm glad I stopped when I did, it's been well over a year that I've done this, is I did find some pages like on Facebook that were podcasters, and there were pages specifically for like review trades. In fact, that may be how I found you originally.
Yeah, we did.
How I found you.
That is how we found each other. That's right.
Oh, that's so funny. I just remember that. And so and this is why I chose to have you on our show, and you ended up having me on your show, is you do get a sense. Like if I give you a review, I want to listen to your show, and you can listen to mine, you can give me a review, and that builds both of our reviews, but it gives you the opportunity to listen to, okay, this podcast is about women in South Asia 100 years ago, and this podcast is about trains in Europe, and this one's all these obscure topics, but you really get a sense of like, okay, there's a lot of really poorly done podcasts out there, and there's a lot of podcast hosts out there that are not doing any research, and it's there was one that was like 3 drunk dudes that would get together and talk about their weekend golf game.
Just go to the bar to hear that. You don't even need a podcast for that. So like, what value, what comes up a lot when you sort of research how to put good content together for a podcast is this question: what value are you offering the listener? And, so like take your podcast for Boundless Body, for example, the value is obvious, like you're giving information that can help someone's well-being and their life and their health and how long they're going to live and their energy level. The value is already built into your podcast. That's one reason I think that it's so successful. But 3 drunk guys talking about their golf game, you can get that anywhere. You don't need to go. You better then be Joe Rogan and Bill Burr. You better be so hysterically funny that people want to hear about your golf game. Yep, so you're selling something else. Actually, you're selling, you've got to be so funny that I can't turn away. I can't turn it off. But how many people are really like that?
That's right. It was the 3 hosts, and they probably have 3 interested people in the show, and they're the same.
Well, there you go, man.
Wow. Okay. This is fascinating. Okay. What else have you got?
Let's see. Well, I said, script your solos and listen to, one of the biggest tips, listen to other podcasts and get ideas from them. Listen to Zen Sammich and get a couple ideas there.
Well, they will, because you're always refining the process. It's like we were talking about. You're doing the homework to make things interesting. You're not willing to just sit down and do it the same way every time, and you're learning new things, and that shows up in your show like every month or so. It's it's a little different. It's got a better nuance. It's more listenable. I don't know. I really appreciate that.
ABT, baby. Always be tweaking.
Always be tweaking.
And then, back to the marketing stuff, I would say pick one platform. I mean, you can be present on 4, but I have found that when I just put all my energy in one, it's quality over quantity. And so LinkedIn might not be for you, whoever's listening. Maybe Twitter is your thing. Maybe TikTok. TikTok, I keep hearing that the algorithm is very favorable. You can get in front of a lot of people. I don't do it because I don't want to create, selfie video type things. And it's not conducive to what I do on the podcast. But I've heard of podcast people that they get their audience through TikTok. If that's your thing and that works for you, do that. Be present on the other ones and occasionally, show up and grab the name. So you're like, when I started, I grabbed the Zen Sammich name on all those platforms so that if I ever did make it Joe Rogan big, nobody can go steal it. But just put your efforts into one, whatever the one is for you.
Yeah, that's great advice. Couldn't agree more.
That is my notes, man.
That's great. Dramatic pause. Yeah. No, that's great. I really appreciate that. So I do have a few questions for you. Recently, you did an episode where you had somebody on. I couldn't tell whether you fully agreed with that person or not, but you pushed back on something. And to me,
I already know which one, but go on.
to me, it was I felt like you were an advocate for the listener. I don't know what your opinion of what she said was or wasn't, but I felt like you did a really great job thinking like, okay, what does my audience think about this? And maybe there's people out there that think this person is really kind of full of crap. And I don't know. And I wonder if part of that comes from your, background as an attorney, but how are you able to push back on a person in a way that's respectful, which I felt like it absolutely was, but also has that person kind of go more in depth, which again, as a listener, I wanted you to do that. And I was really glad you did.
Yeah, I know exactly which episode you're referring to. And I don't mind mentioning it. I don't think she would mind. I had Christine Meyer on. She wrote a book and she is an advocate of law of attraction philosophy and idea. And there's a lot of good message in that. And I'm not going to rehash the episode, but the pushback, I did because I do have some questions about it. And, so my pushback was, well, look, I don't want to ignore the elephant in the room. There are critics of law of attraction who say this. How would you respond to those critics? So to answer your question specifically, sure, some of that comes from being an attorney. And I was a trial attorney in the criminal courtroom, not in civil practice. And so, you have to cross-examine witnesses. I wasn't cross-examining her. She wasn't a hostile witness, but you do learn how to ask certain questions to, invoke certain responses. Well, yeah. But I do want my guests to always feel comfortable. I tell them off camera sometimes that like, particularly if they have like a sad story or something, or they have, like I just interviewed, it's not out yet, but I just interviewed a blind woman who is totally blind now, but had sight. So she lost her sight in her adult life. And I wanted to assure her before we even hit record, she has a pretty good attitude. So I wasn't too worried about her about it, but that I'm not Barbara Walters. I'm not trying to, I'm not looking for drama at all. I want the person to feel comfortable and I'm interested in your story. I'm not Barbara Walters and I'm not a gotcha journalist. I'm not like the guy who interviews Trump or Bush and is trying to get them to say something, or, Obama or Biden, whatever your political leaning is. I'm not trying to set you up, in any way. I really wanted to know with that lady, like, I like the ideas in law of attraction, but what about the guy who like cuts me off on the road? Did I attract that into my life? And her stance is, yeah. I brought that into my life. And see, I don't agree with that. I actually do think there is some randomness to the universe. That things do just kind of trip and fall in your path. And I don't think that you invited but that's just my thoughts on it. I totally respect hers. So I guess that it comes from that. I'm going to respect whatever you're saying as something that you actually believe. Just tell me what your reason for believing it is. So I'm not going to try to get you and corner you, but I'm curious. Why would you think this?
Yeah.
So.
Well, I see the way you set up the question. You kind of took yourself as a critic out of it and said there might be some people out there who think a different way. And That's a really friendly way to do things. It's a complete, you don't know who those people are, but there might be some critics out there who think differently. What would you say to them? And I think that's a really great way to word that sentence. And it's such a cool thing about podcasting and learning human communication, in my opinion.
Well, that, this is, if I had you on my podcast again, which is a great idea, by the way, even though, like, let's forget her episode where I agreed with some of what she said, but I actually didn't agree with that part of it. But let's say you, for example, where actually you do know that I am an advocate of the keto diet. I lost 70 pounds by doing it. And so I know it works and all that. I'm on your side on that. But if I had you on, I would probably ask you, because if you're going to sell something, whether it's law of attraction or a keto diet or whatever, you better be able to back it up, for the critics that are out there. So, even though I agree with you, I would ask you, like, well, what do you say about people who say that you need a certain amount of carbohydrates in your diet or whatever? And then you're fully prepared to answer those questions. I'm sure that you're locked and loaded to respond, just like she was. So I'm not going to ask a question that's like, it's going to be the first time they've heard that question.
Yeah. Yeah. But what would you say to a vegan or whatever? Yeah.
Yeah. A perfect question, right? Oh, let me write that down when I do have
one. Oh, man. Well, okay. So this has been a fascinating conversation. I love this. I do want to close a little bit with something that you've also evolved on, which is video. And we've gone in different directions on this. And I'll just set this up by saying our internet connection has been not super great around here. And I just have to remind myself that if I'm recording video and it makes the audio suck, to me, I have to remember, like, this is a podcast. We're not trying to do every platform. We don't need to be everywhere. This is a podcast. Let's focus on really good audio. And over time, our connection's gotten a little bit better. And I've also learned how to do editing on YouTube a little bit more, which is extremely minimal. But it's been interesting to start to include more video. And I've gotten it down to a process that takes me a few minutes. It's not very tedious. I just copy everything over from the episode anyway. And then I'll release it as a teaser on YouTube the day before the actual podcast drops, just for the hell of it. And I would say it's gone well. Some of our videos have thousands of views, which is great. I can also kind of take an interview, and something I've done recently is take an interview and let's chop this down, not to a 30-second soundbite, but let's make this 8-minute long part of the conversation where the guest explains something really well. Let's make that like a kind of a mini episode, and let's tease the actual full episode. So, like, for example, Ben Azadi, we just had Ben Azadi on. I asked him to explain what the hell ketosis even is. And, for 8 minutes, I asked him maybe 1 or 2 questions, but he really got to the point. And like, wow, okay, let's cut this down and let's be this like short kind of teasy episode. And I thought that's gone really well. And you have done a lot of video and now you're kind of moving away from it. So first of all, the question is why? And second of all would be like, what advice would you have if somebody wants to include video, or should they just not?
Well, there's a couple of different ways to approach that, but succinctly, I'll say this. The first is just an opinion. The second and third thing I'll say has to do with numbers, but my opinion is just podcasts work better as audio only. When I listen to a podcast versus watching it, when I watch a podcast, a lot of times, I'm distracted by maybe body language or, expressions on their face. And, you might think, well, those are actually good things. It's telling you more about how the person feels other than just the words. I don't know. For me, maybe it just comes down to me being more auditory than visual. I don't know. But I just think podcasts work better through audio. But you know what? Throw that opinion out the door. The numbers are why I really have gone the direction I have. On YouTube, retention is a big deal. And so that means, like, when someone clicks on your video, do they watch it all the way to the end? And, if I'm putting out a 30-minute long interview, And I don't blame folks. It might not everybody is going to watch that from start to finish. They're going to click off of it. And so I didn't really move away from video. What happened is I stopped putting full episodes on YouTube, and I actually did what you were kind of describing. Now I put like a 3-minute snippet. And so the retention is it's much easier for someone to just watch 3 minutes. And plus I get to pick out what 3 minutes I'm going to put. I listen to, I've recorded a 30-minute episode, let me take the 3, not always the most, I don't try to put the spoiler in the clip, but I'll pick out a really interesting 3 minutes, put it on there. And, so the retention has gone up on my YouTube channel, but the third reason is it screwed with my numbers because, my YouTube, I put it up on myself when my host doesn't put it on YouTube. So what that means is my analytics, when I'm looking at downloads, the YouTube numbers don't show up at all. And actually my YouTube numbers are pretty poor. And so that was another reason I was like, man, I don't want people to go find me on YouTube and think, well, there's only like, 5 guys listening to this podcast. I have hundreds, thousands in some cases, but they're listening to it on Spotify or Google Podcasts or Apple. And those YouTube numbers don't reflect in my analytics. And they also kind of make me look bad almost if people just judge by how many people on YouTube are looking at me. So, so I just stopped giving so much of a darn about YouTube. Also, it's a lot of work. I'll spend a week editing the audio on a podcast episode and doing the promo for it and all this. And then I'm like, oh man, now I got to go upload this thing to YouTube. I got to go write a new description. I got, it's like a whole new branch of something to do. So I just cut back from my own sanity.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. So a few things, I guess, that I would say is like my YouTube editing is I trim. I only trim the beginning and the end. The audio that comes in, like our intro and outro music, doesn't show up on the video since I'm using the Zoom, video. So let me just edit this all the way to the very beginning. We'll edit it until I say, and this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio. Cut. That's it. And then, and unless a guest says like, hey, would you mind cutting this out? I might make 4, 5, 6 edits to the audio on the podcast, but I don't even try to touch the video. Whatever we did is coming through. It's coming through. That's fine. Unless you say like, hey, that 15-minute political rant I went on, maybe we should cut that out. Like, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's cut it out. And the other thing I can do, which is kind of nice, which is what I used to do all the time in the past, and I would put these up on YouTube, and some would do really well, is my editing software that I use called Alitude, which I pay for because they make things really easy and automatically send everything to my host Buzzsprout. You can create a video that from the audio that all it is like a title and a squiggly line. It's not recorded, people talking, but it is the audio that somebody could listen to. But if you watch it, it's just going to be squiggles.
It's an audiogram. I think that's what they call it in the biz. Yeah.
Got it.
I put those together myself sometimes on my own video editing software. But oh man, you had said something else too that I had another light bulb went off, and then it just clicked out. Oh well. Anyway, I forgot. I had a thought.
Editing that out.
Yeah. Actually, perfect. That clued me back in. Yeah, actually, I don't edit the whole video either. I edit my audio, but I don't edit the video. And here's why. I do upload it, but you can't find it. It's only for my Patreon supporters. So I do still. That's the other reason I don't put full episodes on YouTube anymore, because I want to give the financial supporters of the show some bonus. So those people and those people alone, only those people get to watch a whole Zen Sammich episode. And I almost never take out even the like hiccups and the goofs. That's kind of part of the bonus that you get. You get to see the full naked version. Well, not full naked, but you get to see the unscripted goofs and gaffes that I leave in just for the Patreon people.
Well, you heard it here first, Zen Sammich listeners. If you want to see Mark Reid naked on his podcast, make sure you sign up. I always think with Patreon, I think like there's no way I could build this up to the point that it would contribute even a fraction. If somebody can listen to this for free, why would they pay? And you make such a good case for it. Like, this is going to cost you less than a cup of coffee. You have $3. I'm going to send you an amazing, beautiful, which I have. Look at this. I'm going to send you an amazing, beautiful postcard. Oh, look at that. That's from Japan.
Handmade, baby.
Handmade, handwritten, which I love. I love these things. I've been giving these away, but I almost like kind of hoard them a little bit because I love them. You sent these to me over a year ago, and you can see I still have like 10, 15 left. But anyway, you're offering people a higher amount of value. Has it paid off, would you say? Do you have enough Patreon subscribers that it's like making a difference?
Well, it pays for the show for sure. It pays for anything that, whether it's hosting or even, equipment, if I might need, I need to get like a little boom stand or whatever you call those things that you've got. Like, that might be the next thing I invest in. And so cool. I take all the money that comes in from Patreon and I put it back into the show. Cool. So is it paying my mortgage? No. But does it pay for the show? Yeah. But as far as it being worthwhile, I probably monetized or went to Patreon sooner than almost anyone recommends. And true enough, the first few supporters of the show, they were like friends. Well, it's not family. It was just friends who wanted to support the show. They're like, I'm not going to notice if $3 a month gets zapped off my credit card. That's fine. And so it started that way. But in the last few months, and this is the most rewarding thing. This is some encouragement for someone starting out on a podcast. It might take you more than a year because I'm like a year and a half old now. But in the last few months, I've got people, strangers I don't know, just this, a guy from over here, a guy from Oklahoma, a woman in New York. I don't even know how they found me. I don't know if they found me on LinkedIn, if they found me on Facebook or whatever. They found the show. They love the show. They want to help it out. And so it's so rewarding when you get the stranger. It's one thing for your friends to chip in $3, but when you just get a random stranger, like, I love the message you're putting out there. Thank you for doing it. Keep doing it. Here's $3. That's, it's not even about the $3 at that point. It's just
super cool.
That you touch somebody.
Wow, that's super cool. Man, this has been an amazing conversation. We've had 2 of these. I can tell you that 2 will not be the last time we have you on. We definitely want to bring you back on so we can keep talking about your evolution through this. So many different nuggets of wisdom and advice, things that I've learned and will take from this episode. And I know our listeners will as well. Where can people find you and find your podcast?
Well, they can go to zensammich.com. That's easy to remember. Or, one reason I named my show such a kind of distinct name is it's easy to find. So go to wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, Amazon Music, and just type in Zen Sammich. It's the only one. So ZenSammich. So Sammich, not sandwich. And, heck, you might could type in sandwich, maybe it'd come up. But anyway, just do the search for it. But I'm on all the platforms just like you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so very much.
I live near that thing, by the way. I took that picture.
Do you really? That's beautiful.
I took that picture.
Well, this is a thank you card, a warm note to say thank you for supporting the Zen Sammich Podcast, spread some calm and kindness in the world. Beautiful paper, beautiful picture. You live in a beautiful part of the world. And this has been an awesome conversation. So really, thank you so very much, Mark, for everything you do. And I highly recommend that people check out your podcast. You do a great job. So thanks again.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you having me on.